All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. This time we're going deep into a really dark part of American crime, the story of Billy Mansfield,
Oh,
a
yeah.
serial killer. And his story, it just goes across years and states. We've got a whole bunch of sources,
Mm.
court records, newspaper clippings. We even have some stuff from biographies. So
Wow.
it's going to be really interesting to try to make sense of this case. Get ready. This one's having.
It is a fascinating chance we have, not just to look at, when things happened, but to really try and get into the head
Right.
of this guy. What made him do what he did? How did he end up like that?
Yeah, what made him tick? What led him down this path? So let's start at the beginning. Billy Mansfield was born in 1956 in Grand Rapids, Michigan,
Okay.
eldest of five kids. And his dad, William Sr., he was a convicted child molester.
Hmm. We can't say for sure that what the father did directly caused the son's actions,
Right.
but it does make you think about, how trauma can be passed down through generations.
Yeah.
It's like this ripple effect. Early exposure to violence and abuse, it can really shape how a person sees the world
Yeah.
and maybe even make them more likely to do similar things themselves. It's a tragic pattern that we see a lot.
It is. It's unsettling to think about how these patterns just keep repeating through family.
Yeah.
And in Billy's case, it's even more disturbing. He was convicted of sexual misconduct when he was only 19.
Oh, wow.
He did some time, got out, and then there were more assaults. More teenagers were victimized.
Hmm.
And it's this classic escalation of violence that we see in so many criminals' profiles, unfortunately.
It really is. And those early offenses, they're like red flags, missed chances to maybe intervene and help him.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, if there had been better support systems, could he have turned out differently?
Yeah, it's a question that haunts a lot of these cases.
Hmm.
So in 1975, Billy got married, had two children, but the marriage ended in divorce just 4 years later. His ex-wife, she describes him as easygoing when he was sober,
Okay.
but when he was drunk, prone to violent outbursts.
Hmm.
This kind of Jekyll and Hyde personality, we see it again and again in his story.
Absolutely. This is a really classic example of what we often see in people who are prone to violence.
Hmm.
This unpredictable mix of seemingly normal behavior and then sudden aggression. Really dangerous combo.
It is a dangerous combination.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's fast forward to a crucial point in 1975. New Year's Eve, a 15-year-old girl, Elaine Ziegler, she disappears from a campground in Florida.
Oh, wow.
Gone, no trace.
It's tough, these disappearances, especially when there's no body, no clues right from the start. It's just pure agony for the families.
It
The
is.
not knowing, the questions that never get answered. It's a unique kind of torment.
It's a wound that never heals.
Yeah.
Now, here's where things take a really dark turn. While he was in prison for assault, Billy, he shared a cell with a man named Albert Lee III.
Okay.
And Lee, he confessed to killing an 11-year-old girl.
Oh, my God.
And Billy, in a move that says a lot about him, agrees to testify against Lee
Oh.
in exchange for a lighter sentence.
That's a tough one morally, right?
It is.
Here he is accused of violent crimes himself.
Yeah.
And he gets a chance to game the system,
Mm-hmm.
to benefit from another man's horrible act.
It's a moral tightrope.
It really is. Makes you think about his moral compass, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
His willingness to use someone else's tragedy to his advantage.
It's a pretty grim picture.
Mm-hmm.
And once he's out, the violence doesn't stop. In 1980, he assaults an 18-year-old named Pamela Sherrill, but runs off before he can be caught.
Oh, jeez.
Later that same year, he's arrested in Santa Cruz, California, but makes bail.
Hmm.
This is not just random violence anymore.
No.
He's learning how to avoid the cops, going across state lines.
Right.
His methods are getting more sophisticated.
He's getting smarter about his crime.
Yes, he is.
And that makes him all the more dangerous.
And tragically, his crimes escalate even further. In December 1980, the body of 29-year-old Lene Seiling is found in Watsonville, California.
Oh, wow.
She had been strangled. This change in location, it's important, don't you think?
Yes.
It suggests he was intentionally trying to, expand his hunting ground
Mm-hmm.
to make it harder to connect his crime.
Exactly. It's a chilling progression in how he operates.
Right.
He's learning, adapting, getting bolder with every crime.
He is, but eventually the law catches up with him. He and his brother Gary are arrested in Nevada and extradited to California.
Okay.
But the story takes a truly horrifying turn. The police, acting on a tip, they excavate the Mansfield family property back in Florida.
Hmm.
And what they find, it's truly the stuff of nightmares. Multiple graves.
Oh, no.
Each one containing the remains of a young woman.
Oh, my gosh. It's like evil hiding in plain sight.
It is.
These normal-looking places, they often mean something to the killer,
Right.
And they become these chilling hiding places for their darkest secrets.
One of the skeletons is identified as Elaine Ziegler.
Wow.
The girl who vanished from the campground 5 years earlier. Can you imagine the family's heartbreak after all those years of not knowing?
It's a terrible end to a long and painful search.
It is.
But this case, it also shows us how far forensic science has come.
Right.
Another victim, Teresa Fillingham, disappeared at 16, and she was finally identified just last year.
Really?
Yeah, using genetic genealogy.
Wow.
This technology, it's totally changed how we solve cold cases and bring closure to families who've been waiting for decades.
That's amazing.
It's a bit of hope in a very dark story.
It is a glimmer of hope. Sadly, though, two of the bodies found on the property, they still haven't been identified.
Hmm.
They're Jane Doe's. Their stories remain untold. Their families still waiting for answers.
It reminds us that every victim has a story, a life cut short, a family left grieving. It shows how important it is to keep investigating, to use the latest technology to give these forgotten victims their names back and bring some justice to their families.
Now, while all this is happening in Florida, Billy is in California awaiting trial for the murder of Renee Solling.
Right?
And in a move that shows just how bold and desperate he was, he escapes from jail.
He escaped.
How he climbed onto a roof and jumped off.
Wow. That takes guts.
It does.
Risking everything for a shot at freedom. But it also shows a complete disregard for the law,
Right.
Like he thinks he's above it all.
He does. He's recaptured after 11 hours.
Oh, okay.
But this escape attempt, it just adds another layer to his already complicated psychological profile.
Definitely.
He finally goes to trial, convicted of Renee Solling's murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. Then he's extradited back to Florida to face charges for those 4 murders on his family property.
Facing the death penalty in Florida.
Right.
The stakes must have been incredibly high.
They were. I imagine the walls were closing in on him.
Yeah.
Both literally and figuratively.
Mm-hmm.
And that pressure, it might explain what he did next. He pleads guilty to all 4 murders in Florida, a calculated move to avoid the death penalty.
That's a tough one ethically.
It is.
Does a guilty plea, a life in prison, does that really give justice to the victims' families?
It's a hard question. There's no easy answer.
No.
And the weight of that decision, the balance between punishment and closure, it hangs heavy in a case like this.
It does.
It really does.
That plea deal, it really does. It brings up a lot of questions about justice itself.
Right.
He'll be locked up forever. But does that really bring any comfort to the people whose lives he destroyed?
It's a tough question.
It is.
And maybe there's just no good answer. But even with the life sentences, Billy's story doesn't end there. While he was in prison, there was this incident. A group of inmates,
Okay.
including that spree killer, the one, Robert Dale Henderson.
Yeah.
They tried to break out a
Wow.
pretty daring escape attempt. And Billy was actually given the chance to join them.
Really? And what did he do?
He refused.
He refused. That's odd. Why would a man who once, climbed a roof and jumped off a jail to
Right.
escape turn down another chance? Especially with a guy like Henderson involved.
It's a real head scratcher, isn't it? Was it a change of heart? Maybe he realized running was pointless? Or maybe he was just scared of the outside world. I mean, things had changed a lot while he was locked up.
Maybe he found some kind of control, in the routine of prison life.
Yeah.
A control that he wouldn't have out there in the uncertainty of the real world. Or maybe, just maybe, he felt a little bit of remorse. Like he realized how terrible his crimes were, all the pain he caused.
It's impossible to say for sure, but it just adds another layer to this already mysterious figure.
It does.
But this incident also makes you think about our prison system. How do
Yeah.
we punish people and still give them a chance to change?
Right.
How do we stop these cycles of violence and offer real opportunities for rehabilitation?
That's a tough one. It's been a problem for criminologists and policymakers for years.
Yeah.
And the case of Billy Mansfield, with all those missed chances to help him and the bleak outcome, it just shows how complicated human behavior is.
It does.
And how limited we are in understanding and controlling it.
Yeah. And we can't forget about those 2 unidentified victims from his property.
Oh, right.
They're still nameless. Their stories are incomplete. Their families will never have closure.
It's heartbreaking. It's a constant reminder of the real human cost of these crimes.
It is.
The pain that lasts long after the violence itself.
Yeah. But talking about hope, we've mentioned how much progress has been made in forensic science, especially with genetic genealogy, and how it's helped solve cold cases and bring closure to families who thought they'd never get answers.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It is. It's a powerful tool. It lets us look at old cases in a new way, find new leads,
Right.
and even identify victims who were nameless for so long.
It's almost like rewriting history.
Yeah.
Giving justice a second chance for those who were denied it.
It's a reminder that even when something awful happens, there's always hope.
Right.
Always a chance for things to get better. And the search for truth and justice should never stop, no matter how much time has passed.
It shouldn't. And speaking of digging deeper,
Yeah.
we've talked about Billy's willingness to exploit people, his lack of empathy. What else can you tell us about his psychology? What drove him to do these horrific things?
Well, we can't really diagnose him from a distance.
Of course.
And even if we could, it wouldn't explain everything about his actions.
Right.
But from what we do know, there are some patterns, some traits that line up with, well, with what we know about psychopathy.
Interesting.
His superficial charm, how manipulative he was, his disregard for social norms, his impulsivity, all of those point in that direction.
Yeah, I see that.
And the fact that he felt comfortable, bringing men home from gay bars for sex right in front of his wife.
Wow.
Even talking about a murder with her.
Really?
Yeah, it suggests a really disturbing level of detachment. A comfort with breaking boundaries.
It does.
It shows a deep disregard for normal morality.
Right.
A willingness to push the limits, to shock and disturb.
Agree.
This kind of behavior, on top of his history of violence and manipulation.
Yeah.
It paints a really unsettling picture.
It does.
A man driven by his own desires
Right.
with no regard for the consequences.
Yeah. So we've talked about his crimes, his victims, the trials, his escapes, even his psychology.
Right.
But the big question is still there. Why? Why did he kill?
It's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And the answer might just be beyond our grasp.
It might be.
Serial killers are often driven by so many factors.
Right.
It's rarely just one simple cause.
It's complicated.
But we do see a pattern of sexual violence in a lot of his crimes. Could that be the main reason?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
The fact that he targeted young women, often strangling them,
Right.
it suggests a desire for power and control,
Yeah.
a need to dominate and possess.
And burying his victims on his family's property, it could be seen as a way of, claiming ownership,
Right.
keeping them close, even in death. It's a chilling thought. And his past with sexual deviance,
Yeah.
his willingness to take risks, to cross those lines,
Right.
it all supports that theory.
It does.
But is there more to it than just sexual gratification?
I think there has to be. A lot of experts think that a deep sense of inadequacy, a need to make up for feeling weak or out of control in other parts of life,
Yeah.
it can fuel this kind of predatory behavior. The thrill of the hunt,
Right.
the feeling of power that comes from hurting and terrifying others,
Yeah.
it can be addictive, a twisted way of proving they exist.
It's a scary thought
It is.
that someone who seems normal could have that much darkness inside. It's easy to just call someone like Billy Mansfield a monster,
Right.
to distance ourselves from the horror of what he did.
Yeah.
But that oversimplifies a complex problem.
Absolutely. We have to hold people accountable for their actions.
Of course.
But just labeling them as monsters keeps us from really understanding what causes these tragedies.
Right.
It's not about excusing their behavior.
No.
It's about recognizing the mix of individual psychology, social factors, maybe even biology, that can lead someone down such a dark path.
It's about facing the fact that this kind of evil can be anywhere.
Yeah.
In anyone. And understanding where it comes from is the first step to stopping it from happening again.
I agree. We need to go beyond simple labels.
Right.
Look at the complexity of human behavior, see the warning signs, and build a society that promotes empathy, support, and early intervention.
Okay, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
we need to go back to something we touched on earlier. Billy's testimony against his cellmate, Albert Lee III.
Oh, yeah, the deal he made.
Remember, he gave crucial information about Lee murdering that 11-year-old girl, Inda Vanderveen,
Right.
all in exchange for a shorter sentence.
A deal with the devil.
It really is.
It's a fascinating twist, isn't it? A man who would later be convicted of multiple murders helps put another killer behind bars.
It's a paradox. It shows how morally complicated our justice system can be.
It really does.
Does the end justify the means? Can we trust the word of someone like Billy Mansfield, knowing he's capable of violence and deceit?
It makes you think about truth, about how reliable witnesses are,
Yeah,
and the compromises we make in the name of justice.
right.
In this case, Billy's testimony, even though it's morally questionable, it did lead to the conviction of a child killer.
It did.
But it also shows how slippery a slope he was already on, willing to manipulate and use others for his own benefit.
Yeah.
Like a glimpse of the darkness that was going to take over him completely.
It's a chilling reminder. Even when we're seeking justice, we need to be careful. We need to recognize that people, especially people like Billy Mansfield, have their own agendas,
Right.
their own hidden darknesses.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
Weighting the benefits of a conviction against the ethics of using someone so morally compromised.
Yeah.
It's a debate that's still going on in legal circles, and Billy Mansfield's case is a perfect example of the challenges we face in this complex area.
These are issues that definitely need more discussion.
They do.
But for now, I think we need a moment to just absorb everything we've learned.
I agree.
When we come back, we'll talk about the aftermath of Billy Mansfield's crimes.
Okay.
The impact they've had on the victims' families, the investigators who chased him, and the communities forever scarred by his violence. We've spent, well, a lot of time in Billy Mansfield's world.
Yeah.
Tracing his life from, his tough childhood to all this violence and despair.
Mm-hmm.
But as we wrap up, I think we need to focus on the people whose lives were changed forever by his actions.
Right.
The victims and their families.
It's important to remember them.
Yeah.
While we've been analyzing Billy's, motives and his psychology, we can't forget the real human cost of what he did. The families of his victims, they've gone through a loss that we can barely even imagine.
We can't imagine. And that pain spreads outwards.
Yeah.
It touches not just the families, but whole communities.
Right.
The fear, the uncertainty, that shattered feeling of safety.
It's true.
Those are wounds that can last for generations.
Imagine, like a young girl disappears from a campground.
Yeah.
Suddenly, every parent is terrified,
Right.
questioning the safety of places they used to think were safe.
It changes everything.
It does. The joy of a family camping trip, it's replaced with worry and fear.
That's the scary thing about these crimes.
Yeah.
They take away our trust, our sense of peace,
They do.
our faith in the world.
Exactly. And it's not just the families and communities that are affected.
Right.
The investigators who work on these cases,
Yeah.
they see the worst of humanity day after day.
It takes a toll.
It does. The mental and emotional burden on these officers, the forensic experts, everyone involved.
Yeah.
It's huge. They see these horrible crime scenes, the depravity of people like Billy Mansfield.
It stays with them.
It does, long after the case is closed.
It's amazing how they can keep going.
Yeah.
To compartmentalize like that, to do their jobs knowing the price they pay.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is.
And often comes at a personal cost.
It does.
But it's such crucial work.
It is.
Bringing these criminals to justice, giving answers to the victims' families.
Their efforts should never be taken for granted.
Absolutely not.
Their pursuit of justice, it's a light in all the darkness.
It is. And speaking of light, we've talked about the progress in forensic science like genetic genealogy.
Right.
And how it's helped solve cold cases, bring closure to families who had lost hope.
Yeah.
It's an amazing tool.
It is.
Lets us look at old cases in a new way, find new leads.
Right.
And identify victims who were nameless for so long.
It's like giving them their voices back.
It is. It's a reminder that even in the face of horrible tragedy,
Yeah.
there's always hope.
There is.
Always the possibility of progress. And the search for truth, for justice. It should never end.
It shouldn't, no matter how much time has passed. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you all, our listeners, for joining us on this journey. It's been a tough one, but I hope it's been insightful.
I think so.
We encourage you to keep thinking about these issues, to talk about them, to discuss the complexities of crime and justice,
Right.
and what it means to be human.
Absolutely. By facing these tough topics,
Yeah.
by shining a light on the darkest parts of our world,
Right.
we can work together to build a better future.
I agree.
A future where the horrors inflicted by people like Billy Mansfield are just lessons from the past.
Yeah.
Not stories that keep repeating. Thank you for listening.